Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June webinar. This is John Avina. I'm here with Albert Williams. We're going to talk about pumps today. I guess I should tell a little bit about Albert, and Albert will tell a little more. Albert's, he's in South Africa. Is that true? Are you there right now at this moment?
Yes.
He's in South Africa, and that's why his accent may be un-American. It's a little different than ours. It's nighttime over there, and Albert has been talking at AEE conferences for how many years now? Maybe 6 years, 7 years?
Since 2017, about almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years. Yeah, he presents a lot. He teaches a lot. He's been doing a lot of industrial audits, probably hundreds of them. He's an expert on industrial stuff, and everybody knows it. And anyway, he's going to tell us about pumping, which is a big, part of industrial, but it's also something we could probably run into in HVAC. I mean, in hospitals and larger buildings as well when we do our energy audits. So, Albert, if I missed anything, and I know I did, please tell us more about yourself, and then just jump right into it.
All right, thank you, John. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about myself at the end. I just want to mention quickly, I've got a bit of a scratchy throat. I have to say, I ran 56 miles on Sunday, and yesterday I got quite a serious throat infection, or a respiratory infection, but it's okay. I can at least speak, but I might cough a little bit. It was a very tough race. Comrades Marathon next year is the 100th Comrades. If you want to join us in South Africa, 22,000 people was running this year. Next year, I think it will be 35,000 people running 56 miles. All right, so let's talk about pump systems. 9 areas to focus on. So about 2 or 3 years ago, I also spoke about, for the Abraxas on this webinar, I spoke about compressed air systems, and also that was 9 areas to focus on. I thought this year, let's talk about pump systems, trying to make it simplistic and understandable. And what are the things that you need to look at when you are approaching a pump or a pump system? All right, so I'm a freelance engineer, consultant. I work for myself. I do some training. I'm involved with the CMCA, CIEP. I'm doing 50,001 CP, and also I'm on the MNV body for that exam committee as well. I do quite a lot of work for the World Bank. A lot of the things that we're going to look at today is from my experience in doing pumping audits for the World Bank. I do some work in Central and South Asia for them, and also some in the Caribbean. I'm currently involved in the Balkan countries as well on pumping audits. So this is the essential slide of everything. This is the audits that I've done, that I've been involved with. It's about 72 audits on pump systems, and I calculated what is my average savings when I approach a typical industrial pump system. Most of these pumps were water utilities, but my findings were that if you go and put 100 units of energy into a motor that's driving a pump, there are a lot of losses everywhere, and we're going to talk about all of these types of losses today in these areas of focus. But my subjective experience or objective experience says that the average savings is 23% on an industrial pump system. 23% is feasible savings. From the 100 units you put into a pumping system, only about 38 of those input units actually reaches the end of use. The other units is losses that's not feasible to be recovered, but you can then get your 23% saving, and the internal rate of return is 34%, which says that pumping systems are quite attractive. And these are from mostly utility systems. If you look at industrial systems, they are even more attractive for energy savings because you've got some variance in operation, whereas water utilities are normally fixed operation. So attractive is pumping systems. Firstly, the systems approach is the concept that most of you might be familiar with, but we just want to emphasize this fact, and we're going to look at these areas of what is included in a pumping system. Right. So, for example, if you go and you put in a certain amount of energy into a motor, let's say that's worth 1.49 million US dollars to drive a properly sized pump. And then we're going to have all of these kind of losses on the coupling and the suction and parallel pumping. We will speak about all of these areas of losses. But in your typical pumping system, you will again find about only 200,000 US dollars comes out, reaching the end of reaching the end point. All of the rest is wasted. So if you multiply all of these components, you get a 13% system efficiency. This is just an example for a typical pumping system. Now, from a decision-making perspective or from a stakeholder perspective, people often focus on replacing pumps and replacing motors and looking at these types of technologies rather than taking the systems approach. So if you are going to only look at pump efficiency and improving the motor efficiency, you get a few percentage point improvement. But if you go and calculate the system efficiency, from my 13%, I'm now going to go up to 15%. But it would have costed me maybe $100,000 to do something like this. So the business case is not very attractive. And the point here is that you can also put in an extremely efficient pump. You can buy the best Switzerland pump that is the perfect technology in the world. But if your perfect pump is operating in a wrong or a mismatched system, it's still going to operate inefficiently. So we need to go and investigate these pumps in quite a lot of detail to understand what is the operational efficiency of a pump. So this is not a very good idea to only go and fix the pump and the motor or to upgrade them. You would like to take the systems approach where we address all of these losses. Obviously, we do the first ones or the most attractive ones first. And if you go and address all of these components, you're going to go up from the 13% all the way to perhaps a 50% improvement. So now you're getting 200,000 US dollars at the end destination, but your input is only $0.4 million coming down. I think we said it was 1.49 million in the beginning. So if you calculate the savings there, old minus new divided by old, it is 73% saving that you can achieve by taking the systems approach. And that's what we want to focus on now. So I tried to categorize this in 9 areas of opportunity, 9 things to look at when you are approaching a pumping system. And these are the 9 areas that we would like to focus on in this presentation. So these 9 areas also are very closely connected to different performance curves that you often get from the manufacturer. Some of them you have to draw yourself, but I will speak about these performance curves. And when you are doing a level 3 audit or investment grade audit, really you have to dive deep into these types of performance curves and understand how they are working. How does your operational changes influence how these curves are structured and where you are operating on these curves? So firstly, let us just look at the static head. The first opportunity is to reduce static head. Now, what is static head? Static head has to do with the elevation of a pump. Now, why is that important? Because if we want to calculate the fluid power of a pump, in other words, the physical output hydraulic power that's exiting a pump, we need to use this formula where we take flow rate times head, and this is total head. And this total head comprises of static head plus friction head. And that's the first 2 opportunities that we would like to focus on, static and friction head. If you can reduce those 2, ultimately your fluid power is reduced. Ultimately, you're going to save energy if you do that. So that is a formula to calculate your fluid power output of a pump. So, as I've said, your total head in meters is equal to your static head plus your friction head plus your velocity head. Now, velocity head is very small. Normally, we leave that out in our practical calculations. It has to do with the amount of energy required to move water at a certain velocity, but we can ignore that for practical purposes. So static and friction is what we are concerned about. So what is static head? It is defined as the tank. Let's say you're pumping from one tank to another tank, or from a river or a pond to a discharge tank. It's defined as the water level, the surface level of the suction tank, the difference in height between that tank and the height at which you want to pump that water to. So the suction tank fluid surface height versus the discharge water level surface height. Now in this case, we are pumping from this tank. The water is gravitating into the pump, and we are pumping up all the way to that height over there. So that gives us a delta height of 2 feet, which is my static head. Now, one of the problems in this picture is that the water is falling down into that tank on the discharge. So what you want to do is, very simplistically, make sure the water is not falling. Extend this pipe into the water, that you are making use of the siphon effect, and you don't have this falling of water, and that's going to reduce the discharge tank's fluid height. So there you save a few feet. Also, now on the suction side, you must make sure that this tank is as full as possible. Something simple, make sure your level controls are set up so that the tank is as full as possible, because the fuller the tank, the stronger the pushing force we get into the suction of this pump, and ultimately we can reduce our total static head requirement. So in this specific example, actually now we've got a negative static head, because we are going to go from this level, we are going downwards to that level because of the submerged pipe on the discharge. So actually in this case, we've got a -1 feet static head. So this is just an example. In this specific example, we don't even need a pump, because the water will flow freely because of the height difference. We just have to overcome the friction. But this is how static head works, and this can be basically a zero cost opportunity. Just check your level controls. So these are some examples. This is a tank where this is on the suction side, where the tank is only half full. Just make sure the tank is as full as possible to get maximum suction pressure. There as well, there's about 6 feet of height that we are losing because this tank is not full. And when we do these kind of audits, you need to go and measure by using a tape measure. What is the difference from that water level to where the pump is situated? So just some examples of the audits that we are doing. This is in India, these static pressure measurements. You can also use, there is the measure software, some of you might be familiar with, that is from the Department of Energy, freely available. And also there are some calculators in this software. You can just Google measure, I think it's Oak Ridge Research, ORNL, Oak Ridge Research National Laboratory. But yeah, there's some calculators. You put in your diameters on the suction side, the elevation, the heights, and now this tool can help you to calculate these types of height differences. All right, that's an easy one, static head. Next one is friction head, opportunity number 2. Friction head. What is friction head? This is the resistance that the water will see as it is traveling towards its end destination. Here is a famous formula for the mechanical engineers called the Darcy-Weisbach equation. Now, the Darcy-Weisbach equation calculates a friction for me. It converts elbows and diameter and length of pipe and components and the structure of the material. It converts that into a equivalent feet of head. We convert friction into feet of a friction head. Now the formula tells us that the longer the length of a pipe, the more friction you're going to have, right? The more frictional head you're going to have. That makes sense. The velocity has got a big impact. The faster the liquid is flowing, the more friction you're going to have. And then pipe diameter is the one I want to talk about. The pipe diameter has a huge impact on your frictional head. So have a look at that pipe. That's an old pipe that is scaled over time, and perhaps you're sitting with half a diameter pipe because of scaling or clogging up of that pipe. Or the pipe is perhaps undersized when it was designed originally. So what will happen with this formula if the diameter is halved? If you put half in the denominator, what's going to happen automatically is that the velocity goes up by a function of 4. And that is because flow rate divided by the area of a pipe. If you go and put half into the diameter there, you're going to get half squared in the denominator, and that's going to give us a 4 there, and that's where that 4 comes from. So just trust me on that. So 4 squared is 16. 16 divided by half is 32 times. Your friction goes up 32 times if you halve a diameter of your pipe. So pipes are critical. The diameter of pipes are critical for pumping systems. Or let's use another example where we don't take such an extreme situation. What about a 10% diameter change? What will then be the frictional improvement or increase? If you put a 0.9 in the denominator over there, in the Darcy-Weisbach equation, your velocity is going to go up by 1.23. So 1.23 squared divided by 0.9 is a 70% increase in friction. So that's a 10-70 rule. 10% diameter increase or decrease gives you a 70% increase in friction, or a decrease in friction if you have bigger pipes. So diameter is critical for our pumping assessments. You should keep your pipe velocity, your fluid velocity, lower than 6.5 feet per second. And in the oil and gas industry, they use these pipe pigs that they insert into the pipes. They open the pipes up from the inside to do inside cleaning. And with this pipe pigging, we are able to sometimes even double the flow in old pipelines. All right, so I've got quite a lot of slides here, a lot of information. The intent is not to go through everything in a lot of detail. I think the slides will be made available for you. So I'll just try to touch on the things here. But you get your system curve. This is an example of a system curve. And we've got pressure or head in feet on the y-axis, and we've got flow rate in gallons per minute on the x-axis. Now, if you've got a system where there's only friction, there's only resistance, there's no elevation, but only friction, then your system curve would look like that. This curved line. System curve is the resistance or the demand of the system. All right, if we've got a static only system, from you pumping from the basement to the roof of a building, then you're going to have a flat line like that. Okay, theoretically. But most systems will have some component of static and friction head. So that's a very typical type of a system curve that you might find, but you need to go out into the field and draw your system curve based on some real measurements. Okay, so there is my system curve. Okay, now what you get from the manufacturer, they will supply you with a pump curve from the OEM. Now the pump curve is what the pump can offer. Think about this is what the pump can supply, whereas the system curve is what the system needs or the requirement of the system. And what the pump can offer, that has to be matched by what the system is needing. And where those two lines are intersecting, this will always be the duty point or the operating point of our pump. Right. So a pump can either give you high flow and low pressure, or high pressure and low flow. Think about washing your car. If you are putting your finger on the hose pipe, you create pressure, but you are blocking the flow. Whereas if you open up your finger, you're going to get a low pressure but a high flow rate. And a pump is similar to what it can offer us. Okay, so that is our duty point, our operating point. And the area under where your operating point is, that is going to be defined as the fluid power. All right, because fluid power is, again, flow rate multiplied by head. Okay, so that's, if you do that calculation, that's going to represent the amount of fluid power that is required. Okay, so we want to make that block as small as possible, or rather the specific energy should be as low as possible. All right, we're going to come back to that one. The third opportunity here is to reduce the system flow requirement. Now, in the water utility industry, there's something called a non-revenue water, which is basically the amount of water losses from a water utility. Water losses in terms of what is not metered or what is not received from a water utility. So these are things like theft in South Africa, for instance, theft or leakages or misreading. And they say that 91 billion gallons per day is lost from urban distribution systems due to non-revenue water that's not being built. And there are some countries and some numbers there, the USA sitting at about 15 to 20%. It depends probably on the state. But leakages are one of these concepts, and in the audits that I'm involved with, we do see quite a lot of leakages. Some of them are small, some of them are large, but it's quite a considerable amount of leakages that you do find. And some of these are easy opportunities. All right, so just some examples there of valves that's leaking, pipes that's broken, water leaking. So just quite a lot of examples in some of my audits. These were audits I've done in January in India, and it was quite ridiculous the amount of leakages that I found. Even some tanks overflowing, water running through the streets. These are quite easy savings, because if you reduce your flow rate requirement, obviously you save your power requirement. The fourth opportunity here is to focus on control methods. How can we throttle the amount of flow rate that a pump is supplying? Now, you do find, especially in industry, you find a lot of times that they've got control valves that is partially closed. Here we see a picture of a gate valve that's about 80% closed. You will hear loud sounds coming through there as we create a lot of friction, and that's going to be an excessive amount of energy lost through a valve like that. Now, when you are closing a discharge valve, your friction curve, your system curve, because of the frictional component, is going up. It's increasing slightly. And also, when you are opening up that valve, that curve is going to become flatter and flatter. So as we are throttling valves, this curve slope is changing up or down. Now, if you are using a control valve as your throttle mechanism, what you'll find is that if you used to operate, let's use the yellow pen, if you're operating over there, let's say you were at 30 gallons per minute, and now you want to operate at 15 gallons, maybe during the evenings when the buildings are empty. If you do that, all of this red area represents the friction across that valve that is essentially lost energy, because the system curve is changing because of this throttled valve. Now, if you go and install a variable frequency drive, your system curve stays the same as the original curve. There's your system curve, but your pump curve is going to come down, come down, come down, and that is going to be your pump curve. You are changing the pump if you are putting in a variable frequency drive when a pump is rotating at slower velocities or slower rotation. So now we've got our operating point over there. And the blue line, the blue area represents the actual energy that is useful. And we save all of that red area. So that's the difference between a control valve versus a variable frequency drive in terms of energy savings. So variable speed drives can work quite well. Here is some case study in Albania where these guys had a variable frequency drive implemented or installed, but it was never commissioned. So they were running 2 large pumps. There was a huge control valve that was only 40% open, loud sounds coming out there. And basically, by commissioning the variable speed drive and by opening up that valve, they could save 46% energy. And they can even switch one pump off. So that was a 1 month payback project in Albania. Very interesting country, Albania. That's where Liam Neeson always goes in his movies to get his children. But it's a very interesting place. Now, there's a case study, the results there showing you also on the suction side where there's unnecessary frictions. We'll talk about that in a little while as well. Some bad installations here that's also causing excessive losses. So what is a variable frequency drive? It's a very complicated piece of electrical engineering where we are manipulating the frequency by doing some pulse width modulation and some crazy stuff, but we are rotating the motor at slower RPM, and we can get quite attractive savings by using variable frequency drives. Now, there's some new thing that some of you might not know about, and these things are called smart variable frequency drives or intelligent. The different suppliers will call it something different. It's not a conventional shaft turning reduction device anymore. You now find variable frequency drives that can detect the load, it detects the pump or the fan, it knows what the performance curve looks like, and it tries to run the pump at its most efficient point in real time by using self-learning control algorithms. It makes adjustments to the speed, to valves, to the torque of the pump. It changes the pressure and the flow rate continuously, and it also detects when a pump is starting to cavitate. If the impeller starts to cavitate or when the motor windings start to degrade, it also makes auto adjustments in real time. Also, it's got conditioning monitoring built in, so it does measures vibration and temperature. So this is a very exciting new technology that you might want to research. That is the latest and greatest in terms of variable frequency drives. All right, so will a VFD always improve performance? The answer is no. Here is different pump curves at different speeds. So this is now 50 hertz frequency, because where I come from, we are using 50 hertz, 50, 40, 30. So when you're reducing the speed, your pump curve becomes smaller and smaller because you are rotating slower and slower. All right. So your manufacturer will give you also an indication of what the pump's efficiency is at different operating points on the pump curve. So remember, this is our pump curve from the OEM. Now we've got here a 80% efficiency. So there's 80%, there's 78%, there's 75%. We've got these concentric circles that's indicating to us what is the efficiency of a pump, depending on where the flow rate is. All right. So here we've got 4 pump curves for 4 different speeds, and the efficiency is also given to us. So now we want to look at a system with a very high static head, where we've got a line like this. Okay, so the system curve is quite high. All right, system curve over there. And remember, where the pump curve and the system curve intersects, that's going to be where my operating point is. Okay, so if you are running at 100% speed, you are using the dark blue pump curve. and the pink system curve. The intersecting point is going to be right there. And my efficiency is about 80%, my operating efficiency. That's not too bad. What's going to happen if I put a variable speed drive on my pump and I reduce the speed to 90%? If you do that, now you're operating over there on the turquoise line and the pink line. Now my efficiency is still 80% or more, quite good. But what is happening now if I go to 80%? Now my efficiency is dropping on the green line, between the green and the pink line, to 77%. Not so great anymore. Or if I go to 70% speed, the yellow line and the pink line now intersects all the way at 60 or 58%. So the efficiency drops down considerably if you've got a system with what we call a static dominant system, meaning that elevation is the main requirement of this pumping system. If you go down, as an example, to 60% speed, what's going to happen in a case like this? This purple line and this pink line is not intersecting each other. So this pump is not going to work. This is what we call a deadhead pump. This pump has got a 0% efficiency. It's not going to be able to put out any water into the system. So you are limited in a static dominant system to how much frequency you can reduce. So be very careful. For frictional systems, yes, VFDs works excellent. But for static dominant systems, be careful of variable frequency drives because the efficiency is reduced. Right. The next step, number 5 here, is reduce the net positive suction head required or increase. What do we call about what do we mean with net positive suction head? This is the pressure that you will find on the inlet of your pump. And you also get a performance curve for this. We've got on the right hand side a nicely shown diagram where the manufacturer is giving us the performance curve over there. Let's say the system curve looks like this as an example. So what you go there, if you have your operating point, you go down, you will see there's an NPSH curve adjacent to your pump curve. You can come down there, you hit the line at a certain impeller size, you go left, and what this slide tells me is that over there we need 3, this is in meters, but we need 3 meters or 9 feet of suction pressure. And this is what we say the NPSH required. Now, you need to make sure that your required pressure on a suction of a pump is more than the available pressure. Your available pressure should be more than the required pressure. So if the manufacturer requires 3 meters on the suction, we should make sure that we have more than 3 meters. And there are formulas and calculations that you can do for that. It has to do with the friction and it's the pushing force and the velocity of the water that's pushing water into the pump. That has to be higher than the required pressure, because if you do not find that, then you're going to get cavitation, where the water starts to boil at room temperature as it's going into a high pressure zone inside of the pump. So cavitation happens when your suction pressure is not sufficient according to what the manufacturer is required. And you get these types of impellers that is totally been destroyed due to many, many hours of cavitation. All right, and you can hear that. You can hear like a gravel inside of a pump. It sounds like there's rocks inside of these pumps. Now, what are the reasons for this? These are some classical things, what not to do. This was also in January, I saw this. There's the inlet. The water comes through this elbow, there's some turbulence, and the water enters into the pump. Just by the way, look at this these stages. All of these are stages, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's an 8-stage centrifugal horizontal pump. Very nice. It's for high static systems, these stages of pumping. Also on this picture on the top, an elbow right before the suction. And also for this pump, there's a bend right before the entry into the pump. Now we have to make sure that the suction pressure is as high as possible. We don't want any friction, any bends or elbows. We need to have straight pipe that's entering into a pump. Probably something like between 6 and 10 diameters of straight pipe has to be at the entry into our suction. So these are all examples of what not to do. More examples of bad plumbing. All of these adding considerable inlet friction. Elbow, a very sharp elbow right before the pump. A very short straight piece of pipe between the main header and the pump. Some very ugly bends. This is now on the discharge side, but all of these components are adding quite an excessive amount of friction in my system. And you even get installations like this on the bottom left corner, where the operator or the installers probably was a bit lazy and they just made a plan and make some unnecessary bends there. So all of these are very bad examples. This is an example where they actually closed the throttle valve on the inlet. All right, we found that valve to be half closed, creating quite a lot of entry friction. Quite funny. More elbows, more bad things that you might find in systems. Right, also there on the entry, bad components, bad installations, another very sharp elbow. So these are, we want the 6 to 10 diameters of straight pipe in the suction of a pump. More bad examples, more bad examples. You can have a look later on in more detail. Some reducers, pipe diameters going down, and these are all increasing the water velocity. We want slow water velocity on the inlet of a pump. So there are some remedies. There's lots of stuff that you can do. You can make sure, essentially on the right-hand side is the easier stuff and the cheaper interventions. Make sure that there's no blockages, that there's good suction diameter, that there's no unnecessary friction by moving the pump closer. You can even play around with the temperature. You can even play around on the performance curve, where you are running on the performance curve. And that's going to also impact the NPSH that is required. So there are some remedies for this. As long as at the end of the day, your NPSH available exceeds your NPSH required. That's all you need to know. So go and listen to your pumps. If you hear strange noises, that's probably an indication of cavitation. Okay, moving on to the sixth opportunity is maintenance and reliability. There's a big impact between where a pump is operating on its curve versus the maintenance cost. Now, here we've got an example of what we call, I haven't mentioned this, but the BEP is the best efficiency point. This is where the manufacturer wants the pump to run as efficiently as possible. And that's where you should try to run. Now, this slide says that best practice is to run between 75% and 115% of the BEP. So a little bit to the left, 25% to the left, 15% to the right. That's the ideal area of operation. You don't want to go too far left or too far right. For instance, if I take a discharge valve and I close it, my system curve will look like that. And my operating point will now be over there. And now I get all kinds of problems. Low impeller life, low bearing and seal life. I get cavitation, I get temperature rise. And on the right-hand picture is the same situation. So as an extreme example, if you are running at 20% of the best efficiency point, now you're sitting with a situation where your bearings are only lasting 1 year instead of 5 years. the pump's seals only last 2 months instead of 2 years, and the impeller also only 2 years instead of 10 years. So I always ask the question for the maintenance guys, how regularly do you replace bearings? How regularly do you replace seals? If they give me numbers like these, I know that they are probably running very inefficiently and very far away from the best efficiency point as well. And here are some Indian examples again. I pick on the Indians because I work there quite a lot and it's in my archives. So here are some pictures. It's just updating. There are some pictures of a seals that is leaking in my pumping systems, and water is spraying all about my facility. Also, there are a picture here of a valve that's also broken because of cavitation on that valve, and that valve is then leaking water out. So these are some terrible things. Their solution is to put a cloth around it with some duct tape and hope the leakage just goes away. Leaks everywhere. Just some very bad examples. Some interesting stuff there. In the AE conference, I think I'm going to talk there on a session of horror stories, and I'm going to show all these pictures. Someone puts his pants there across a leaking seal to reduce the leakages there. And thermal camera is also useful there to take pictures of the seals and the bearings, and you might also find if there is imbalances in your shaft, you will see hot bearings. Hot bearings also an indication that you're running far away from the best efficiency point. All right, we are moving towards option number 7, area number 7, pumps in parallel. If you are running pumps in series, there is your pump curve for one pump. There is your pump curve for 2 pumps. You are adding them, you are adding the head when pumps are running in series. But for pumps in parallel, the performance curve is added. You are adding flow rate if you add 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pumps. Then your performance curves are adding flow rate to the right side. Now, here is a case study in a beverage facility where they had a very steep system curve. The purple line showing us the very, very steep frictional dominant system there. Right, so we're running one pump and then we are switching on another pump in parallel. Now, what is the difference in flow rate between 1 and 2 pumps? If we are running one pump, there is my flow rate, whatever that is. If you're switching on your second pump, the change in flow rate is only that much. What will happen if you switch on a third pump? If you switch on a third pump, what will be now your improvement in flow rate? Remember where the purple line crosses with the pump curve. Now it's going to be something like this. You can put on 4, 5, 6 million pumps. You can switch them on. It's not going to make much of a difference. So in this case, with a second pump, they only got a 6% increase in flow rate, but it costed them $100,000 extra for only a 6% improvement in flow rate. And that's because the pumps are fighting against each other. As the water meets at the common manifold on the discharge, the water is trying to go from the strong pump to the weak pump. The water molecules are creating a lot of turbulence, and it's also another reason why your pumps should be the same size. If you are running pumps in parallel, make sure they are the same size, that the amount of turbulence and resistance in the common header is minimized. So pumps in parallel is oftentimes a very attractive opportunity. Very common to see things like this. And as a rule of thumb, don't run pumps in parallel if a single pump can meet the system requirements. Pump in parallel will always have some amount of friction and turbulence. This was in Cape Town in South Africa, in the waterfront. They were running something like 6 pumps. 2 or 3 of them were unnecessary, so they could just switch those pumps off. The didn't make any difference in the flow rate. This was in Chennai in India, same situation, not the same situation, but they were running a small pump and a big pump on a Monday, and they were running the other small pump and the other big pump on a Tuesday. Now, small pump and big pump, as they get together in the main manifold, they're going to create turbulence. Big pump is trying to pump water back into the small pump. So these pumps should be the same size. They should be the same strength, the same age. Also, if there's variable frequency drives, they should throttle at the same speed as well. All right. The eighth opportunity is operational efficiency. There's a huge difference between nameplate efficiency and operational efficiency. And I find it's something that people, auditors in India struggle with, is they look at the nameplate and they say, yes, that's my operational efficiency. No. If you go and have a look, here we've got, this was in the Caribbean, in St. Lucia, where that was my rating, my rated efficiency. That red dot is my rated best efficiency point, my BEP. When we did the measurements, we found it's running all the way to the right over there. It's actually quite far away, 33% to the right of the BEP. And I was telling you earlier that you should run your pumps between 75% to 125%. You should be 25%, not more than 25% to the right of the base efficiency point. So in this case, the operational efficiency was only 60.8% rather than the 78%. And that had a huge impact on the input power requirement. Also, the flow rate and the head was also different. And the bearings and seals were not lasting a very long time because of this. Now, by implementing this smart variable frequency drive I spoke about, we could then manipulate the speed and the valves and the pressure and the flow and the torque and everything, and we can then get a 22% saving for an 8-month payback in this specific example. So that's one of the key points I want to make here is when you do pump audits, go and determine the operational points, the operational efficiency, and compare that to the rated efficiency. And that is where huge savings can be available. Right. So if you've done all of these opportunities, you've done all these 8 opportunities, the 9th opportunity is now go and spend money to buy a new pump or a new motor. This is the last thing you should look at. Now, here we've got an example. This is some pictures that we are busy with in India. And I was working with these civil engineers, and they were busy to design a pump system for a 30-year planning horizon. So they are pumping water to a city. It's there in the Himalaya mountains, very beautiful there in the north of India. But these guys are pumping for 30 years, and then they're going to replace their pumps. So I was thinking, and I did a calculation for them, what will be your cost if you run a pump and a motor for 30 years? And I used a lot of metrics there, but 315 kilowatt is the pump and the motor size. And I assumed here that pumps and motors are degrading every year. You lose a few percentage points per year as your pumps and your motors are getting older. I also used the interest rate of 6% in this example. And I used 14 US cents per kilowatt hour for my electricity cost. And I looked at the time value of money and the growth of money. So basically in year 1, we are going to spend this much amount of money to run these pumps and motors. And as the pumps get less efficient and as money increases over time due to inflation and interest rates, after 30 years, you're going to spend almost $10 million to run this pump. So I was thinking, but what about, let's change these pumps in 20 years. What will be the impact if I do this? So you see there in year 20, there's a little jump. The yellow line represents the 20 year. There's a jump because I spent some money to buy a new motor and a new pump. But then in year 21, there's a drop again in the cost to run this pump and motor, because it's a new pump, a new motor, the efficiency is new, it's great. And we can now compare the green and the yellow line year for year to see the comparison and which is going to give us the best life cycle cost. So this is for the 20-year replacement, the yellow bar. And also then I brought in salvage value. You can sell a motor and a pump after 20 years or after 10 years. You can sell that on the black market. You can sell it to Africa. We will buy these pumps. And all of these things are considerations that I put into my calculation. I then went further and did a scenario for a 10-year replacement. So you see in year 10, there's a little jump there in blue because I'm buying a new pump and a new motor. But in year 11, there's a little drop there because the motor and pump is new and efficient again. Okay, so that's my 10, 20, and 30-year scenarios. I then went crazy and I did it for every 5 years. 5, 10, 15, 25, 30. I wanted to calculate what is the life cycle cost of all of these scenarios, and I wanted to calculate what is the best life cycle cost for these scenarios. So I did that in Excel. I did that for the guy from the World Bank told me tomorrow morning we have a meeting. You have to tell them when to replace their pumps and motors. So I went into Excel, and after some few months or years, I recently put that into a website. And just a website I made from myself. I used a little bit of AI to help me to make my website. But these are all calculations that I did. I put in all of my parameters. My motor is 315 kilowatts. I put in the pump efficiencies. I put in the electricity tariffs, the escalation rate for electricity every year. What is your interest rate? So in the first example, I used 0% growth of money and 0% interest rate, just to take that out of consideration. And what this website, and you can also go to this website there, it's a free website, there's no cookies or Chinese watching us or anything like that. You can then go and you can see what is the optimal replacement time for this motor and pump. And in this scenario, it says you should replace your pump every 5 years, which is quite ridiculous if you think about this. Now, if I look at my zero escalation comparisons, 5 years are going to cost me about $13 million. And all of the other replacement intervals are compared to this one. So we save a few $1 million by replacing every 5 years rather than every 30 years. And for this scenario, there are the pie charts to show you what is the energy cost. Let's just use, this is the 5-year replacement interval. So you are going to spend 96% of your costs for energy if you replace your pumps and motor every 5 years. And only about 3.3% will go towards the capital price to purchase a new pump and a new motor. And these are IE4 motors that I am purchasing. So energy is by far the biggest consideration in replacing pumps, in operating pumps and fans. So then I just went into some more scenarios. I'm wrapping up now. I put in some salvage value numbers over there to see what is the impact. And then I also included, this is more your realistic scenario here, where I included the time value of money and interest rates. And this website tool that I made actually shows me that in this specific example, every 2 years replacing my pump and motor will be the most optimal life cycle cost decision. And the savings, when you're looking at the time value of money, you're going to spend $67 million if you replace your pumps and motor every 2 years. If you replace it every 30 years, you're going to spend $89 million for that. So that's a $21 million saving if you replace your motors and pumps more frequently. Now, I'm not saying you have to go and do that now, because procurement will ask you some very difficult questions if you do this every 2 years. But my point is that perhaps we should go and investigate more frequent replacements from pumps and motors, because it is by far the biggest consideration. Just as an example here, every 2.5 months, the energy cost to run a motor will be equivalent to the energy cost of this. Every 2.5 months, the energy cost will be equivalent to the capital price of this new pump and a new motor. And over 30 years, your energy will be 1,047 times more expensive than the capital price of a pump and motor. All right, so that's it from my side. Just some more examples here, and just a comparison there to see what is the difference in different replacement intervals. And the more frequent replacements looks more efficient or more cost effective from a life cycle perspective. So all of these types of pictures and metrics are in that website that you can go and play around with. You can have a look at the pie charts. You can use your own examples. I even use a scenario where I bought the most expensive pump and motor I could thought of. I ask AI, what is the craziest and most expensive gold-plated motor and pump? And even after I bought the most expensive stuff I could find, my replacement interval optimal is still 3-year replacement. So go and play around with that tool for yourself and see what you find. Different projects will give you different answers, but I think you will be surprised. And then just on Measure software, you can have a look there. I'm not going to go through this. I'm out of time, but this is a very nice software. It's free of charge that you can play around with to see what is the impact for making changes on your pumping system. And I've got some case studies there that I don't want to go through. So just as a conclusion, this is just a summary of the 9 opportunities that we have, that I spoke about: system performance, pump performance, and power performance. And just for your records there, your cheat sheet for these 9 opportunities, some bullet listed there, everything I spoke about. And remember, 23% savings, 34% IRR. And that's all from my side. And there is my CV. I'm training, I'm developing courses. I've also been involved with some textbooks. Thank you very much. John, back to you.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I wish I would have learned that like 30 years ago. That was really, really good. I'm pausing and taking time so people can get your email there. So it's aew.energy@gmail.com. All right. You guys, if you want these slides, email us there at webinars@abraxasenergy.com and we will send it. If you want a link to this webinar, which to me would be better than the slides, or maybe you want them both, ask us and we will send you that as well. I had a question, and that is, how do you say you go on site and you develop a system curve? How do you do that?
Okay, so the system curve, you have to basically get 2 measurement points. So if you've got your feet of head, feet on the y-axis, and you've got your gallons per minute over there. So first thing, you need to understand what is the difference in elevation from the suction tank to the discharge tank, or wherever you're going towards. So if there's a vertical height of 10 feet, that's going to be 10 feet at 0 flow, and then you make your 1 dot over there. And then you need another point which will be your operating point. At that gallons per minute, you're running at that feet over there. That's your normal operating conditions. And these things are dynamic. They do change over time as production changes and everything. But then you just connect those 2 points. And you can also use the Measure software to help you based on that slope of that line and some mathematical equations that's used there. But the Measure software has got a tool there as well, a Measure tool to develop your system curve. But you still need to tell the tool these 2 operating points.
So, but just with the 2 points, I mean, 2 points makes a line, not a curve. So we don't know how convex, or I don't know if the right word, yeah,
Yes.
convex or concave the curve really is, right? Or how flat it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So
it's an approximation.
the software tool will help you there to put that mathematical thing in there to determine that. So you can do it like
Okay.
that, but yes, it's not going to be perfect in that case. What you can also do is, if you can change the speed of the pump. No, let's draw another picture. If you've got a variables frequency drive and you've got your pump curve over there, now you determine that your operating point is somewhere over there. Now I reduce my speed, and then I'm going to get a smaller pump curve like that. So therefore, now I do my measurements on my flow rate and my pressure, and it's going to be over there. So you might reduce your speed 3 or 4 times, and now you're going to get different flow rates and different pressures, and then you can connect your things there. If you are in that.
And you've done that before. You've done this before.
Yeah, you have to ask for permission and playing around.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, that's great. That's great. Okay. Where do you get the pump and motor optimizer program? Was that the one from Oak Ridge? Is that the one he's talking about?
That measure software. I think there's actually there might be a mention of this.
Oh, there it is.
There is the link there, but you can just Google. But measure is very powerful. It's not only for pumps, right? I use this a lot for steam systems, for compressed air systems, for fan, for process water heating. There's like 70 or 80 calculators that you can use there. It's really, from a technical perspective, a really, really nice software.
Oh, there it is. Okay, energy.gov. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, perfect. Let's see. Okay, next question. Can you explain the difference between regular and smart VFDs? Again, yeah. So you talked about the smart VFDs. I think you guys, I'm going to find a vendor who makes smart VFDs, and I'm going to have them do a whole webinar on this, because it sounds like, can they talk about this for like 45 minutes or an hour? Is there that much to talk about, or do you think? Maybe not.
Yeah, I think they can. I had a meeting with a guy a few months ago, and they were speaking about this. Yeah, they can maybe make 45 minutes full, or they can talk about some of the other stuff.
We can do a shorter session. Sure. Yeah, that's okay. For sure. Okay. Yeah. But we will do that. I'm going to try to get my hands on someone. I'm hoping that I can get that in September, or no, in August or September. I'm hoping to get someone. But anyway, yeah, go ahead and answer that question.
Yeah, I know a guy that I can recommend for you if you want.
Excellent. That would be great.
Guy, yeah.
That'd be great. So yeah, can you just give another couple minutes, explain the difference between these regular and smart VFDs?
Yeah. Okay. So regular VFD is just regular. It just changes the speed of how fast the motor is rotating. So you change the rotor rotational speed, that changes the impeller's rotational speed, and you're pumping water at a slower velocity or a slower circulation. That's a conventional VFD. Now, you must say if I must speak more about that, but VFDs are quite super complex. But the smart VFDs are now, it's an intelligent control device that is embedded in your variable speed drive. So this thing can determine, firstly, what is the motor driving? Is it a pump or a fan or a conveyor or whatever? And also you need to give it input in terms of what is the performance curve of the pump looking like. So this smart variable frequency drive can then, it also gets input from the pressure meter, right, on the suction and on the discharge. It also takes input from the flow meter. It also measures the kilowatt power of the motor. It might also have torque sensors. I don't know if they measure the torque actually as well, but you get all of these inputs, and based on these real-time inputs, we can then, the VFD then understands where on the performance curve are you currently operating. And it then tries to make adjustments either by reducing the speed or increasing the speed. It might even close valves if it's needed to do that. It can manipulate the pressure and the flow rate, and it tries to run as close as possible to the best efficiency point in real time. So it's got this machine learning things in place to try to do that. So we've actually recommended this for some of the utilities, because water utilities are normally running at a fixed speed. They just run flat out as fast as they can for as long as they can, but they never measure the flow rate and the pressure. So they don't know where they are on the performance curve. They're just shooting into the dark. Now, with a device like this, now you take the operator out of the loop, you try to automate this, and you try to run the pump as efficiently as possible in real time. And as the pump gets older and as the motor gets older and degrades, it also makes adjustments and still try to run as efficiently as possible on that. And now, so just the last thing, the conditioning monitoring is also quite a game changer. We don't need external conditioning monitoring devices anymore. You can now do vibration and measurement and temperature measurement by this VFD, and you don't need the external contracting devices.
So in some cases, though, I mean, just pump efficiency, that's good to make a pump more efficient, but you have an overall system to deal with sometimes. Whereas by making the pump more efficient, you're making the system itself less efficient. For example, if we're talking about a condenser water pump or something like that, if we don't have maybe we need to do more flow because then we need, cooler condenser water coming back. And so it may be that this application is not really for all applications, and just doing pump efficiency isn't what we want. We want overall system efficiency.
Yeah, but or you can do these remote terminal units where the different pumps are talking to each other through a PLC or some distributed control systems. So then your pumps can communicate to each other, and we can try to optimize the entire system to give a certain city water at a certain level at a certain time of day, and that the specific valves are open and closed depending on what the need is. So then we can bring in weather predictions and rainfall and all of that, and estimated water usage, and we can bring AI in. It's quite great.
Here's what I think this might be our last question. I'm not sure, but it might be. And that is, for an office building, the system curve is designed for the peak condition, heating or cooling, which occurs about 20% of the time. Majority of the time, the pump curve could be different due to lower than design case conditions. How do you strategize energy savings on this pump system?
Yeah, look, these curves are all dynamic. They're going to change for sure. Mm-hmm. As your suction tank empties and the discharges, your system curve is going to change. As valves are opening and closing, and as flow rates are increasing and decreasing, these things are going to change continuously as well.
So the
that's the dimension of the system.
It keeps shifting, you're saying, the system curve.
Yeah, so you probably will have to go and draw sort of like a histogram or a load profile to see how many percentage hours per year are you running at this flow rate and this pressure. How much are you running at? 80%, 70%. So you might want to have some sort of a histogram like this to say how many hours you're running at what speeds, and then you can analyze each of these low duration curves individually. In the new CM, if you've done a CM in the last 5 years or so, there is actually a case study where they do these kind of low duration profiles, and they do some calculations on variable frequency drive savings.
I didn't realize that. Okay, that's good. Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking it's possible that you can create a system curve and you could just do it on a day when is the wrong day. And you can make a system curve that might be the very far left bar on your histogram there. And then you end up maybe doing the wrong actions. Okay, but that's good. I didn't realize people do that. Energy engineering's changed a lot. It's changed a lot, and it's going to change a lot, I guess, with AI being incorporated and everything. Okay. That's really good. Albert, that was a really great session. I really appreciate this. I'm sure these folks did too. It was really good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed it. Yes, and yeah, thanks for
Good.
that. Awesome.
Hey, thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.